to Macbeth, Lesson 3. Today I want to talk about Act 2, and we're going to try to get through the entire act and continue finding our theme of appearance versus reality and man's relationship within the cause and effect mechanisms of nature. That's the reading I'm performing. I'm going to continue to do that. So Act 2 opens up, and this is when the murder of the king is going to happen. So it's a very violent, action-packed scene, quite short. We're going to try to get through the whole thing. And it opens up with Banquo and Fleance there. It's nighttime. That's what the key point here is the setting. The setting is midnight, the witching hour, very frightening. Think about the mindset of the Renaissance audience. Quite a frightening idea because of all of the superstitions that surround the owls in this scene, these omens, of course the darkness of midnight. And we can look at the use of light in this scene because Banquo, they're carrying a torch, there's this light within the darkness, right? A minimization of knowledge, this unawareness of what's happening. And we see it in line 9 or so where Macbeth enters the scene and Banquo says, "Who's there?" and has a sword, right? There's already this thread of violence and the idea of the unknown. Who's there? And Macbeth says, "A friend," and reveals who he is, but all surrounded by this darkness. And then Banquo gives Macbeth a gift, a diamond, and hopefully that will recall back to this idea of the crystallization, this multifaceted nature of cause and effect. What will happen? What is the cause? And multiple causes, multiple effects. The multifaceted nature of the diamond that is given as a gift from the king to Lady Macbeth. I think that's an interesting symbol that supports this reading that we've been doing. And one of the things we notice in Act 2 is something added in. So we added into the trinary of action, nature, thought, and we added in feeling, and now we're going to add in imagination, right? Imagination. And line 20, Banquo says, "I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters," right? This idea of dreaming. We're going to see this come up multiple times in this act, right? So adding on to this quality of human thought, that we have thought, we have feelings, we have imagination. And what is the role of these aspects of human consciousness? What is their role within the mechanism of cause and effect? Okay. A little bit of plot movement there where Macbeth says, Banquo, we should chat later about our plans and what's going to happen. And then in line 31, Act 2, Scene 1, Macbeth has a little monologue here. And take a look at some of the things he says. It's really interesting because he asks, is this a dagger which I see before me? Imagination, right? He imagines this dagger. And one of the things happening in the neoclassical period is this question of where does art come from? Does art come from nature? Or does art come from human imagination, right? Of course, I think it comes a little bit from both, but that's one of the questions they're asking during this time. And look how Shakespeare sort of addresses this artistic question when he has Macbeth imagine a dagger. And then the dagger appears. "I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet in form as palpable as this which now I draw." So this is an interesting question about art. What relationship does human imagination have with reality, right? Is it creating real things, or is it purely imaginary? Seems that Shakespeare, and of course you might expect this from an artist, that the dagger that is imagined in the play it becomes a very real dagger, just like the one in his hand. So Shakespeare has this idea that there is a relationship between artistic creation and reality, right? So we're going to see lines 42 down through the rest of this monologue from Macbeth, see this conflict that I've mentioned already between nature and human perception. He says in line 44 or so, Act 2, Scene 1, "Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses," right? My eyes, which bring in sensory input, are made the fools of other senses, my emotions, my imagination. And a few lines down there he says, "There's no such thing," right? There's no such thing. So this question of my imagination, my thoughts, my feelings, do they have a relationship to reality? Instead, what matters is, he says, the bloody business which informs, the reality, the concrete reality. "Thus to mine eyes, now over the one-half world." What is the one-half world? Well, half the world is nature, concrete reality. And the other half of the world is the world of consciousness, right? Of thought, of human emotion, the human experience. That's the two halves of the world. And he hopes to challenge it. Lady Macbeth already has said that through ambition, through bravery, we can overcome these laws of cause and effect. Look at line 56 or so. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps. So here he wants to hide from, to conceal himself from nature, that you can kind of view as, nature's sort of a godlike figure, all-knowing. It has laws you must follow, and here he's trying to challenge those. Then moving along to line 61 or so, another thing I see in this scene is a lot of binary relationships. Relationships between sleep and death, imagination and reality. We've seen this throughout the play. He says in line 61, words to the heat of deeds, to cold breath gives. So words and deeds, thoughts and action. And then there's a bell that rings, and it's a knell of the death of the king, and he wonders that summons thee to heaven or to hell. Now, we should be thinking about that through the same lens of what's the effect, right? Is it going to lead to heaven or hell? It's unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen to Macbeth. In this moment of this cause, he doesn't know what the outcomes will be. Then we go to Act 2, Scene 2, and Lady Macbeth enters, and look at the binaries going on here, these binary relationships, which I'm going to call human responses, human reactions, human perspectives, and they vary, right? There's no universal set laws about how I react. Just as there appears to be, from the human perspective, no law governing cause and effect. We don't know what's going to happen, right? We have ideas of fate. Well, we think that things are set, but since we don't know, since we're ignorant, there is just perception, essentially, for us and our experience. Then Macbeth says at the beginning, that which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. Different responses, right? What hath quenched them hath given me fire. So this is this idea of the effect might be different for different people. Then we have this owl shrieks, and the owl is a symbol of death, but simultaneously the owl is a symbol of some sort of wisdom, right? At the same time, very interesting symbol. We'll see the owl come up again, but keep in mind what we talked about before, which was using animal symbolism. Animals are of nature, and then they have these supernatural elements. So the natural and the supernatural, or we could say nature and human perception. We are the ones who put supernatural elements upon natural objects. So line 8 or so, Lady Macbeth says, death and nature do contend about them whether they live or die. So here's that idea, cause and effect. Macbeth comes in, he has the bloody daggers, and Lady Macbeth, why do you have the daggers? Leave the daggers up there. Macbeth is sort of foolish here, right? But what it really shows through his action of bringing the daggers with him is he's not thinking clearly, right? He's not thinking clearly. And he should be. I mean, Macbeth is this great soldier, great leader, and here he has lost that capacity. And why is it? Because his imagination is running wild. Because his emotions are taking over him. His reason is not quite working anymore. And then Macbeth says she thinks maybe he didn't do it. She says in line 10, the attempt and not the deed. He could not miss them had he not resembled my father as he slept. And, Lady Macbeth said, I would have killed him myself, but he looked like my father. If you want to do some sort of Freudian psychoanalytical reading of that, you could. I'm not going to. Then line 25, look at the binaries here. There's one did laugh in sleep and one who cried. Same idea of the reactions, the responses are different. And then at the line 30, you're down to 35 or so, Macbeth begins to be concerned that God has left him, right? He says, I could not say amen. Wherefore could I not pronounce amen? He's seeing something lost. Here is an effect, right? Here's an effect. This is guilt, loss of salvation, these emotional responses, very negative, and he could not have anticipated them. Maybe he could have, we could have, perhaps. Then line 38 or so, look at the binary here. We saw words versus deeds. Now we see it again from Lady Macbeth. These deeds must not be thought. After these ways so, it will make us mad. Right, here's that danger. And Lady Macbeth does seem to go mad. Macbeth himself seems to go mad as well and loses all reason. Then we see this appearance versus reality. This happens multiple times in this act between sleep and death. Sleep is the appearance of death. Death is, of course, the reality of death. So we see appearance versus reality. Methought I heard a voice cry, sleep no more, Macbeth. Does murder sleep, the innocent sleep? sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life. So this relationship between appearance and reality, but they're different things. And he repeats this multiple times. Sleep no more, I have murdered sleep. Sleep no more, sleep no more. Multiple repetitions of this, right? So this repetition is this sign of this approaching madness. You've heard of probably the cliche of madness is repeating the same actions with the same results, right? And expecting different results, but not getting them. So this repetition here sort of shows this increasing madness of harping on one point. Then jump down, same ideas continue. If we go down to line 53, I'm afraid to think what I have done, right? And then at 55, line 55, Lady Macbeth calls our attention once more to the idea of appearance versus reality. She's talking about sleep and death. She says, the sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. In other words, don't be afraid of things that they're not here. Now, Macbeth is fearing things that are not present necessarily, right? In concrete reality, he's fearing damnation from God. Well, where's that, right? He's fearing loss of reason. His emotions are overcoming him. All these things that are not concrete realities, right? The effects of this concrete action are all non-physical, right? They're all within the realm of human consciousness. So interesting that Shakespeare's doing this, right? He's giving us both concrete effects, death, for example, and he's giving us these abstract effects. So line 62, he says, what hands are these? Ha, they pluck out mine eyes. This is another sign of madness. We saw repetition. But now look how Macbeth is speaking of himself as if he is not himself, right? Because he's not himself at this time. This great leader who can't think to leave the murder weapons behind, brings them with him. He says, what hands are here? He doesn't even recognize his own hands. He's separating from who he is. Line 76, he says, to know my deed, 'twere best not know myself, right? So we see this separation in that scene and what ends up with their madness as an effect. We go forward to Act 2, Scene 3. It starts with a comedic scene, probably to give time for the actors to prepare for the next act. There's a porter, and what I noted here was just his repetition of the devil. Notice it's a prose section, so line 4, 3 or so. In the name of Beelzebub, he mentions the devil multiple times, the other devils. And one thing he repeats in the first 40 lines is the word equivocator, equivocation. Now this is something you could research on your own. There have been lots of criticism of this play, analysis of this play that look at equivocation. And you could look at King James, do a historical reading. But equivocation, how it ties to the play very simply, is we've seen the witches say, for example, fair is foul and foul is fair, right? And we're seeing two things that are different, fairness and foulness, and they're being equated. That's what equivocation does, right? Equivocation sort of merges together opposites at times. It's essentially lies, to make it simple for you. But it's repeated multiple times. Equivocator, 2, equivocate, equivocator, 3, equivocator, equivocates, 4 or 5 times here. Okay, so we have that idea. I'm not going to really touch upon it much, but I pointed out to you for your own studies. Moving along, if we go to line 50 or so, look at again, it starts in darkness, it's midnight. Look at this kind of scary stuff, sort of continues. Remember, they don't have special effects. It has to be done through the language, right? So line 50, lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death and prophesying, new hatched to the woeful time. Very frightening, and there's the owl, the obscure bird, very frightening. Down line 68, 58 or so, oh horror, 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 tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee. Okay, so this hysteria of the actors is adding to the horror of the scene, quite clearly repeating horror multiple times. And Macbeth says in line 61, confusion now hath made his masterpiece. That's a cool line, right? Hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple. Here again a reference to God, but broken, right? Is he going to heaven or hell? I cannot say amen. Beelzebub, other devils knocking on the door. Very frightening stuff, especially for a Renaissance audience. Go down to line 71. We'll see the seeming and the being again. Shake off this downy sleep, death's counterfeit, and look on death itself. Look away from appearance. Look to reality, right? Okay. And this is very real now because those potentials of what will happen have been actualized. The king is dead. Macbeth says to Lady Macbeth, calls her, "O gentle lady," little dramatic irony there. 80, line 80 says, "'Tis not for you to hear what I can speak to, the repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell." So, you can even imagine, I don't know how this affected the audience, but you can imagine even some swooning in the audience with this very horrifying scene. Then we have a speech and reality. Again, speech is a sort of appearance, right? A construct. Line 86, "Dear Duff, I prithee, contradict thyself and say it is not so. Can our words challenge reality?" No, they can't, I think, right? Then, line 88, Macbeth speaks, and there's a question here of free will, a question of agency. Look what he says. "Had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time. For from this instant there's nothing serious in mortality. All is but toys. Renown and grace is dead, the wine of life is drawn, and the mere lees is left this vault to brag of." I like all is but toys, right? We are the toys of nature, the toys of cause and effect, the toys of God, right? We see that here. So yeah, we have a seeming and reality again, because as it says on line 88, Lennox says, "Those of his chamber as it seemed had done it." It seems that those two guards, that Lady Macbeth got drunk, that they killed the king. They seemed like they did, but they didn't. That's not the reality, right? And then Macbeth, maybe he did it out of rage, maybe he did it as a practical, cold-blooded choice, but Macbeth says that he killed those two, so now there's no witnesses, right? Leave no witnesses. Then line 105, "Who can be wise, amazed, temperate, furious, loyal, and neutral in a moment? No man. The expedition of my violent love outran the pause or reason." So as I said, those emotions are taking over his reason. And line 110, "His gashed stabs look like a breach in nature." So does human action challenge nature, right? Because it seems quite unnatural, we'll see that word used in a moment, unnatural to kill your fellow man, to betray your loyal, beloved leader. But Macbeth does, right? Look at line 113, there's a chiasmus, we've seen this device before, "that had heart to love, and in that heart courage to make loves known." We've seen fair is foul, foul is fair. Now we see that chiastic structure again, this idea of equivocation. It could be either way. There's a mention of fate in line 118, if you want to take a look at that. Almost through this act. I'm trying to move through the play a little quickly because I can only record for a limited amount of time. Yeah, so look at line 120 or so. Malcolm says in an aside, Donalbain. Now, these are the king's sons, and they think that they'll be, that it'll seem like they killed their father. Yeah, so the king's sons, they flee away, probably quite smart. So they will be suspected of killing their father, but actually they also think that maybe someone wants to kill us too. We see that because Donalbain says in line 137, "There's daggers in men's smiles." So in other words, there's a smile, but there's a dagger in it, appearance and reality. And the final scene of this act, Act 2, Scene 4, we have Ross enter with an old man. And look at another chiastic structure here. First in line 6, we have that threatens his bloody stage. So again, Shakespeare often does this, calls out the idea that this is a representation, this is an artistic creation, right? We saw that previously. Then, by the clock, 'tis day, so it's daytime, and yet dark night strangles the traveling lamp. It's night's predominance or the day's shame. What's going on here again is that it's daytime, but it appears dark. Well, why is that? Because my emotions, my imagination is darkness. We saw this same idea in Romeo and Juliet when Romeo makes an artificial night by pulling down the shade. So it's daytime, but it's nighttime inside of his mind. Then the old man says of all of this, and I think this is kind of a key line, even though it's only 2 words, "'tis unnatural," right? "'Tis unnatural." And that's that conflict between, is human, are we part of nature? How does our actions, how do our thoughts, our imagination, artistic creation, how does it challenge the laws of nature, right? It does seem to do so. And the old man, again using animal symbolism, says that he saw a falcon was killed by a mousing owl. Now a mousing owl is supposed to kill mice, but here it killed a falcon, quite unnatural. So the animal symbolism, again, I've mentioned this device already. So Ross also points out that Duncan's horses turned wild in nature, contending against obedience, make war with mankind. It's the same theme, I hope you would agree. In line 25, Macduff says, Malcolm and Donald Bane, the king's two sons, are stolen away and fled. Remember, they fled in the last scene, which puts upon them suspicion of the deed. Now, again, did the sons think that would be the effect, that they would be suspected? And Ross says, against nature still. Against nature still. So that's happened multiple times. And then the plot moves forward. Macduff and Ross, they're going to leave and going to Fife and going to Scone. And line 41 to end the scene, Old Man says, God's venison go with you, and with those it would make good of bad and friends of foes, to turn things to the unnatural. Okay, so what are we seeing in Act 2? Hopefully I'm giving enough evidence to show you that these are the themes running through the play, right? Appearance versus reality, man's role within the mechanism of cause and effect. We're building evidence for this argument, and we'll pick that up in the next class.